All right, Paul, welcome to the Hub. Excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
This will be a good episode, especially with the NBA regular season wrapping up, playoffs starting to happen. This episode will be talking to the expert himself. Working at ESPN, and having a PhD in statistics. This will be good. This will be timely. So maybe why don't you go ahead and talk to us a little bit about how you got involved in sports analytics. Like maybe give people your background a little bit so they understand where you're coming from and why you're an expert.
Yeah, so I think it's probably not the person that a lot of people want to hear from when it comes to my career path, because I get questions all the time about how did you get into sports analytics, from people that are in college or recently graduating and are trying to get into the field. And I guess my path is a little bit different. I didn't like sports analytics was always something I thought was fun and like a hobby, but I never really planned on having it be my career. I always have sort of taken the career choices in my life that I thought would keep the most doors open. So there's, some people try to minimize risk, and that's kind of how I was. I was just trying to I don't want to throw anything out. And so I was in undergrad and I was trying to figure out what to major in. And I knew I always liked math, or I was good at it, at least. I wasn't sure if I liked it. So, after taking AP calculus in high school, and then my first semester of college, I took linear algebra and I hated it. Worst grade I actually ever got in college.
Linear algebra is a little tough, that's for sure.
And so I was like, I can't do math. I have to do something maybe like math or uses math. So I thought about engineering. I went to a class and I went to one lecture and I walked out halfway through and I was like, no, I cannot do engineering. This is not me. And then I was like, I love sports. And whenever I watch sports, I always was interested in the data and the numbers. And I remember taking AP statistics in high school and I thought it was a breeze. And so it clicked. It just kind of made sense in my head. I should study statistics. And so the next semester of college, I signed up 10 credit hours of statistics. I was all in and I never turned back. So I was only going to get an undergrad, but I always, when I had the choice to choose a project or something, I could choose a data set or anything, I always try to do sports because it just was more interesting to me. So I ended up getting my master's in statistics at BYU as well. I was able to do it just with one extra year of school. And then I was planning on going into the workforce. I did my master's project on a March Madness NCAA tournament television ratings, and analyzing what draws them the biggest audience. And we found that it wasn't the big name teams. Actually, it was always when there was a Cinderella making it to the Final Four that drew a bigger audience than any of the big name schools. And that was sort of a unique and counterintuitive finding, I think, for most media people. And when I was finishing my master's, I wasn't really keen on getting a PhD. But like I said, I didn't like shutting doors. And so I kind of went to this approach where I was like, I'm going to apply to a few jobs. I'm going to apply to a few schools and we'll see what happens. And the jobs either didn't appeal to me that I got, or I didn't get the ones that I wanted. And the schools that I really wanted to go to, like Wharton or Duke, which has the best Bayesian statistics program in the world, I didn't get into those. And so I ended up getting into Virginia Tech, which has a very good statistics program too, but it's not Duke, it's not Wharton, it's not Stanford. I didn't apply to Stanford, but those are some of the top ones. And so I went to Virginia Tech, and about 18 months into my program, one of my former friends from my master's program, he texted me. I was sitting in a class and he was like, hey, there's this job opening at ESPN. And he had worked with Ben Alamar, who was the head of the sports analytics group at ESPN. And he used to work and consult for NBA teams. My friend Nick Martineau, who played basketball at BYU, and he was in my stats program with me. He worked with Ben for the Cleveland Cavaliers during our master's program. He did an internship there. And so he's like, hey, he's looking for someone. I think you'd be good. Are you interested? And I was like, yeah, sure. Send him my name. So I applied. And I was in between It's the funny story is I took my qualifying exams and I was told that I did not pass. I would have one chance to retake, but I was the top non-passer in the program, and they only accepted like 3 or 4 people the first time in the whole program to qualify for the PhD. And so I was kind of in this like irritated state where I was like, oh man, I was like annoyed that I didn't pass the exams, but I had a retake, and then this job, like, so I applied to the job. I didn't apply to any other jobs. I wasn't like looking for jobs. So I was like, but it's ESPN, it's sports, like that's like right up my wheelhouse. And
The
so,
Mecca, yeah.
so I applied to the job. They flew me out to Bristol, Connecticut, and I like did not tell anyone in my program. I, as most people do when they look for new jobs, they don't tell a lot of people. And to my surprise, actually, I didn't think I would get the job. I was not super confident. I thought, there's probably a ton of people that are very qualified that are applying for this job. But I got the job offer. And so then I had to make a decision of, all right, am I going to finish my PhD or am I going to take this job? And it was a tough decision. So I decided I was just going to go take the job. But I had a lot of pride. And so I wanted to pass my qualifying exams just for myself to prove that I could. So I didn't tell anyone at school for the rest of the semester. I had like 6 weeks. And the end of the semester, I took my qualifying exams again and I passed. And then I told them, hey, I'm going to go work at ESPN. And they were like, well, since you passed your qualifying exams, and because I already had a master's, almost all my coursework was done. It only was deficient, I think, 1 or 2 classes. They're like, and I was already working with an advisor on my dissertation who was so Virginia Tech is in Southern Virginia, Blacksburg. My advisor was on a campus in the DC area. So I was already working with him kind of remotely. And so I was like, well, hey, like I'm, in 2015 or so, I was kind of like, one of the early remote workers, I guess. But I went to ESPN and I at nighttime worked on my dissertation for about 3 years and I finished a few years ago. So at the end of the day, I didn't close any doors. I got the job and I got the doctor.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw like 2015 when you started working for ESPN, I was like, wait a second, I thought he was, at Virginia Tech and finishing up his PhD. So I didn't know all those details. So that's thanks for sharing. But I think I think this is really the benefit of college. And most of my listeners have already graduated from college, but some haven't. Is that college, you get to meet those people like Nick Martineau, right? Like you form these friendships, you form these connections that you never know where like they're going to lead, 5-10 years down the road. And besides getting the good, an excellent education, you also get to meet people from all different spheres of life, and they go very different places. And like, it's just cool. College is a really cool time, and it's a special time for sure.
Yeah, I might have had, so the person I replaced at ESPN also was a colleague of mine from my master's program,
right. Yeah.
Zach Bradshaw. I didn't even know that when I applied to the job. I didn't realize he was at ESPN or that he was leaving to work for the Detroit Pistons. And so I think, I don't want to say I got preferential treatment. I don't think I got preferential treatment, but I do think when you network,
they were familiar with BYU. Yeah, right.
They knew
the program. They knew
people that spoke highly of me. So when they were trying to decide between the last 2 people, they went with like people they trusted that personally knew me. And obviously when you network, and then that's a huge part of life is networking. And that certainly helped get me to where I am. And I'm really grateful and lucky and blessed. And, in some ways it's hard for people that don't have that or, social or personable skills. And so like, it's, in my job, and I've always tried to think how to like eliminate biases and, it's important to try to do that too. Like just because someone knows someone, like I've benefited from that, but I also don't want other people to like not get jobs because they don't. And so we always have to make sure we do things we can to find the best people, no matter who they know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an advantage for some people, others it isn't, but they have other ways that they can get advantage. Some people like fresh thinking. They don't want the same old. And so, yeah, it just depends, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So working for ESPN, have you met any famous athletes or anchors? I mean, I just saw Kenny Mayne. He's retiring, leaving, or being shoved out the door. It's not quite sure, but
Yeah, I'm not gonna speak on it. I'm not part of any of those decisions, obviously. But I mean, Kenny was one of my favorites growing up. Um, I was talking to a colleague of mine last night, and it is kind of sad. Most of those early 90s, early 2000s sports centers, broadcasters, anchors are gone or moved on
yeah,
for one reason or another. I mean, my favorites were Kenny Mayne, Stuart Scott,
yeah.
and so some of my few other ones are still with the network. Scott Van Pelt and the LA guys, Stan and Neil, that they're still going on strong, but it is a different age in sports media than it used to be.
Well, and I don't want, this will be still a sub point, but so you can not talk about it if you don't want to. But I feel like Sports Center in itself has uh, it's been facing some pressures with the new age media. There's lots of different media sports outlets, whereas like I feel like in the 2000s, when I was in high school, it was like, hey, Sports Center was it. Like that's where I went for all my sports. There was nothing else. Like uh tuned in to watch the top 10, watch all the highlights, but now I just go to
Yeah, I
Instagram
mean,
and
I'm not going to speak to ESPN decisions or anything like that, but I will say it is a different landscape. I mean,
yeah.
people have the phones. Really, it's the smartphone really changed the way people consume media and everything, not just sports, but it certainly affected sports. And I think I didn't really answer your question about famous people. Yeah, I've met a lot of anchors.
Oh,
Sat
you
in.
froze up for a second.
Oh,
I'll just say as he comes back,
okay.
uh, yeah, House of Highlights on Instagram, Bleacher Report. So yeah, the media landscape's definitely changed for sure. But Paul, yeah, so you were saying famous people you've met.
Yeah, I mean, I've met most of the Sports Center anchors, either been in show meetings with them or for other various reasons, other talent, most of the talent, Jay Billis. I remember one time early on at ESPN in the cafeteria, I went a random time of the day because work was busy and I forgot to bring my lunch. And so at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I went down to the cafeteria. I went to go get like a hamburger. And like standing next to me is like Jalen Rose. And if you forget how tall NBA players are,
Yeah,
former
for sure.
NBA players. And I was just chatting with him, and he was just like telling me what his favorite like meal was, and like, oh yeah, if you get the grilled cheese here, you have to get it this style, or it was great. And at ESPN, like most of those people like are really personable and like love to chat and work with. And so it's been a great. I remember when I interviewed and I saw like Adam Schefter for the first time, I was like in awe, like, oh, here's the NFL reporter, like he is the
Yeah.
guy. And wow, is he a lot shorter than I ever thought he was.
It's definitely interesting meeting these people in real life for sure. So you've been on the air for ESPN as well. Was that nerve-wracking for you?
Yeah, I've done a few podcasts and the national championship college football. We've had the last couple of years we've done a data center alternate broadcast, and so I've been a analyst in those the last 2 years. It was a little nerve wracking. TV is a very different world. Oftentimes you'll hear critiques be like, "Oh, how hard can it be?" But like there's always sorts of little different things, and you always notice when you like say you never notice the times you say or you hesitate when you normally talk. But when you listen to yourself in a recording or you watch later on TV and you think you sound stupid, So it's a little nerve-wracking, but I think advice I always got is you just have to be confident in who you are and what you know, and know that you belong. And if you do that, then typically it's okay.
Yeah. I know that experience after listening to my own recordings, and wow, I said like 20 times. I don't even remember.
Yeah.
Switching gears switching gears a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the analytics? Like, what does sports analytics mean? And can you talk a little bit about Bayesian statistics? Just like high level overview. Don't go, this isn't a lecture, but a little
Okay.
bit of an overview of like what Bayesian statistics is and how that applies in a sports analytics. Like, how do teams use it, or what's the application of it?
So it's going to be, there are two different questions you asked, and both can have very long answers. So um, I'll answer the sports analytics one, and then if I ramble too much, remind me about Bayesian statistics. All right, so sports analytics, I think analytics itself is a very broad, general, businessy word. And typically when people use analytics in a business sense, they think, like a dashboard that tells me, my stock prices, or how much stuff we've sold, for our business, or our consumer traffic on a website, things like that.
Right.
And, in sports, people kind of use it as a buzzword as well to talk about, like, nowadays it's become so prevalent. 10, 15 years ago, coaches weren't making decisions based on some mathematician's knowledge, right? They're making decisions based on their own knowledge or their own experience. And one of the things I've really learned and gotten into is, this is a economics, behavioral economics thing, is Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work about decision making, and how we kind of have two parallel paths of decision making in our brain. One that is reasoned and data principled and well thought out, but when we're emotional, we make different decisions that are sort of based on fear. So usually sports are a very emotional thing, and so when people historically have made decisions about sports, it's based on their own experience, maybe based on their biggest regrets or their biggest failure. And the human is made to survive, right? And we've survived as a species for a long time, and become smarter and stronger and better. And so sports decisions were made always in kind of in that sort of primitive mind frame. Well, 10, 15 years ago, if you've read the book Moneyball or seen the movie, right, like the Oakland A's really adopted using data much more than, personal experience, or just trusting the coach, or just trusting the person that has, 20, 30 years experience. They trusted the data a little bit more. So analytics in sports kind of came from that. And it now has sort of become like a buzzword to me. Anytime someone makes a data-based decision in sports, for me personally, sports analytics is more about modeling and predictive and things that you can't just say, look up on a box score. Like box score statistics, those are still statistics, those are facts. But to me, that's not analytics. Analytics is something you have to go a little bit deeper and ask questions, or it's more of the toolbox or the frame of mind that you use to say, I'm not just going to ask how the numbers, I'm going to ask why, and kind of trying to derive causality in sports. So like, what causes people to win? Not you win when you do, like, in football, for example, you hear this still all the time, and it's so very wrong. This is my best example, is you'll hear, if you run the ball 25 times, you win in a game. But that is not true. I mean, that's true as a fact, right? Like when you run the ball 25 times more, you win most of the time, like, 90, I don't know the exact number, but 90%, whatever it is. And but that's not causal, right? You don't run to win. You actually run the ball when you're winning to run the clock out.
Yeah.
And that's why there's such a high correlation. So sports analytics is going, not just looking up facts like when you run, you win. To me, that's not sports analytics, but it's looking at building a model and saying, actually passing is the most efficient thing you can do in football. And unless you're winning by a lot, and then you just want to run the clock out, and running is better to kill the clock.
Right.
So it's saying, actually, when you win, that causes you to run. And that's what sports analytics can teach you, is that winning causes running, not that when you run, you win.
It's the understanding that correlation, it's separating correlation and causation. Correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, but if you were a coach, a lot of times you could have this heuristic, or you could have this thought that, oh, if I run the ball a lot, I'm winning, when they're actually being confused with, no, winning like is a symptom of, hey, I need to manage the clock, and so I'm going to run the ball a little bit more.
Exactly. So it's sort of just that frame of mind of like trying to answer questions about sports using data in a smart way, in an intelligent way, using models or, you know, some sort of inference or machine learning or things like that. To answer your other question about Bayesian statistics, so, you know, like I mentioned, wanting to go to Duke because they had the top Bayesian statistics program. Much like in economics and statistics, there's kind of like two traditional frame of minds, and most people historically were what we call frequentists. And frequentism is this thought process of probability is only what you observe over repeated experiments. So if I flip a coin 100 times, I know that the probability is about 1/2 because I flipped the coin 100 times. And a frequentist can't answer the question of what is the probability that something lands on heads if I've never flipped it before. So, you know, if you've never observed a coin flip and someone says, what's the probability it lands on heads? You can't answer that question as a frequentist. Bayesian statistics will say, well, I have some prior intuition, and I'm going to assign some probability before I've observed any data. And so I know, maybe you present me a coin, and I've never seen this coin flipped. So maybe it's from a different country or something else. And maybe there's some small chance that it's not evenly weighted. And so perhaps it's not exactly a 50-50 coin. So I might assign some probability that it's not, but I'm going to assign some distribution and say, most likely this coin is 50-50, unless me. So maybe I'll assign like 5% chance it's like a 90% coin, but a 95% chance it's a 50-50 coin. And then I'm going to flip the coin 100 times. Or maybe I just flip the coin 3 times. And in the 3 times, it lands heads once and tails twice. And I think to myself, if it was a 90% coin, it's really unlikely to get one heads, only 3 flips.
Right.
So it probably is a 50-50 coin, and I'm going to adjust that information. If I flip it 25 times and I get 20 tails and 5 heads, then I'm going to start thinking, well, actually, it's more likely it's that 90% coin if I observe 20 tails out of 25.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to adjust my prior belief with every new set of information. And how that applies to sports is, you can imagine a lot of what we do at ESPN and on our sports analytics team is we have our power indices that predict like how good a team is and if they're going to win, or, you know, the chance that they're going to make playoffs, things like that. So we might have started this season in the NBA and thought, you know, the Jazz are a good team, but they're not the best or even close to the best. They're just a solid playoff team. Yep. Right? But then we observe 3 months into the season that they've played like one of the best teams, and we think, oh, maybe they are the best team. But we now can fill in our prior belief with data, and we don't have to observe a ton of data, and we can still be very accurate. And the great thing about sports and in Bayesian statistics is, if you don't, like, people all the time will be like, well, why are your rankings still impacted by what you thought in the preseason? And 100 times out of 100, your rankings are always more accurate if you include that preseason information. Sports is such that it really isn't that much, like in a football, in the NFL, to see 16, 17 games a year. Like, when you flip a coin 17 times, like, getting 12 heads out of 17, if it's a 50-50 coin, isn't that crazy, right? So you have to have some prior information to sort of update that belief. You know, that's just not that much data. So Bayesian statistics works really well in sports because we don't have a lot of data in sports. We don't observe teams playing a million games. Yeah. Or, you know, so we have to fill that information in with what we knew going in. And people analyze sports so much that we typically know a lot going in. And we've tried to stray, and our metrics mostly are independent of betting lines. but betting lines are very efficient for most sports. And so if people use betting lines to inform what they think about a team before the season, it's going to make any prediction they make very good.
Yeah. It's easy to see where, people put their money where their mouth is. What they really believe. Money is probably a good indication when they're betting their own money. Two questions, though, I had about Bayesian statistics. Well, one's more of a comment. The first one is, I like Bayesian statistics because it can fill in, right? You're not just using what you observe, your other intuition, and you adjust your distribution, what you think, as you get more and more data. For me, that seems powerful. That seems like it seems very useful. It seems really applicable in a real world setting where a lot of times, especially in economics, you're not, economies are not in a laboratory type setting, right? It's not the same thing over and over again. Variables are different, the environment's different, and so a more flexible type of framework, I feel like, is powerful. Second question that I had: how does Bayesian statistics incorporate, or how does it handle biases? Because if you're using your prior intuition, are you carrying that biases with you, and does that show up in the model?
That's a great question. Do you know the answer to that?
I don't, actually. I just thought of it while you were talking. I was like, I need to ask him about this.
So typically when we, in statistics, when we talk about, estimating parameters are things that define the model, variables that define the model. So you could say, parameter would be, in baseball, how far is a home run going to go? Well, it's going to be some function of its exit velocity and its launch angle in a simple model, right? We'll ignore any friction from the ball or seasonal patterns. And the parameter would be like, it's this times exit velocity plus this times launch angle equals, the home run distance. And that's going to get you really close. So in statistics, when we're trying to estimate these parameters, the frequentists, all the parameters and all the estimation methods that they've come up with are very focused on making them unbiased. And so if you think about like a dartboard, an unbiased model, you're not going to always hit bullseye, but on average, the average of all your estimations is going to be a bullseye, right? But you might be all over the map. You might be all over the dartboard, but on average, you're going to hit the bullseye. Well, a Bayesian statistics is they are biased. So on average, you don't hit the bullseye, but each dart is going to be closer to the bullseye on average than the frequentist method, if that makes sense. So you're closer on average. Every dart is going to be a lot closer to the bullseye, but on average, you're going to be slightly off. So the center of the Bayesian darts are going to be maybe just slightly to the right of the bullseye, but they're all going to be clumped together very close around that. A frequentist is going to be unbiased, but have more variance with their predictions. Right. So it really depends on what are you trying to do. Are you trying to be closer to the truth, maybe with a little bit of bias? Then you're Bayesian. If you don't care about being that close to the truth, as long as in a long series of truths you're on average correct, then you're a frequentist. Another way to think about it is we all come into any situation in this life, though, as humans, we're Bayesians. Yep. Our brains work that way. So if I talk politics with you and you have a different upbringing, a different background, and we can talk, for example, I don't want to get into politics, right? But I've seen a lot of chatter about the crisis in the Middle East right now between Israel and Palestine, or in the Gaza Strip. If you come into that with a background from Northern Africa, and likely, you were raised in a community which heavily Islamic community, you're, no matter that, it's a war, and you're going to probably side with the people that are more like you, which would be the Palestinians.
Right.
If you come from it from not that all of them are going to do that, right? But on average, more of them are going to
side with
that way, because they view the same data, but they come into it with their bias, which is that Israel's probably,
the aggressor or taking land, or
And if you come from it from a white Caucasian perspective, you probably had more, especially, you know, in the Northeast where I live, you probably had more Jewish friends growing up. And that's going to impact your bias of, you know, Israel is this place of where Jews are seeking refuge and they're just trying to, you know, preserve themselves. And either way you're looking at it, you have a bias and you're going to think that the person that you are more like is just trying to protect themselves, right? And so I'm not going to give my opinion on the matter, but that's what data will do. When you have your own bias coming into it, you can look at the same data and you might move a little bit towards that data, but you're still going to be on your side of the data.
Mm-hmm.
And depending how strong your bias is, if you have very weak biases, you're going to just move to where the data is. If you have very strong biases, Bayesian statistics will say it's going to take a whole heck of a lot of convincing data to move you off that opinion. And that's really how humans work. If we didn't have very strong convictions about politics or things like that, we would all agree because the data would be clear, but the data is not super clear, right? And a lot of things in politics, the data is very messy and very unclear. And so when you have your personal bias, that's not enough to move you. The data is not enough to move you off your bias typically.
That's well said. Thanks for expounding that. What would you say has been the main holdup for the application of statistics in real life? And let me start with sports. The 3-point line has been around for a while, but it only seems like it seemed like Steph Curry had to show like that threes are worth more than twos for the whole NBA to change and start shooting a lot more threes. The NFL has some embrace of analytics, but they kind of, you know, they have their own biases as well. And so they're pretty strong in saying, no, I'm not going to go for it on fourth down, even though the overwhelming evidence is you should go for it on fourth down a lot more. Why is there this reluctance to adopt analytics, and then why has it in the NBA? Let me say it like this: in the NBA, it seems like analytics are fully embraced. They use it a lot. Coaches use it a lot. The NFL, it doesn't seem like there's that full embrace of analytics. Why the difference between the two leagues?
Well, let me just say that I don't think there's a difference. I think the timelines are shifted. So baseball was really the first sport to really go all in. And a lot of people say, well, it's because baseball, you know, it's a simple game. You know, you just, you know, there's 3 outs and, you know, you can have runners on first, second, third, or some combination of them or none, right? So you have all these game states that are very well defined and the game only moves between those unique game states. That's great, but you can analyze other sports, right? So we talked about this. So, you know, baseball adopted this and started adopting with Oakland A's about 20 years ago. The Red Sox sort of bought in. They had more money, and so when they bought in, they
Certainly
could buy in
helps.
a lot more, and they ended their 80-plus year World Series drought, right? And then they won 4 out of like 13 World Series or something after not winning a single one for like 80-plus years. So baseball's all in. I mean, every baseball team, every Major League Baseball team has an analytics department, people looking at this stuff. But to no surprise, the Dodgers have the largest now in the league. I mean, they I don't know the number, but I saw a picture recently of all their analytics staffers with getting their World Series rings, and it must be 20 or 30 people that work for the Dodgers. Right, and they also have a ton of money, and they can, you know, get players like Mookie Betts and re-sign Clayton Kershaw, and that helps too. Obviously, having money helps and spending it, but they're also very smart in the way that they do this. In the NBA, it was probably 10 years behind baseball, so maybe about 10 years ago, it started a shift. What really changed things a lot was, like you said, the 3-point revolution, but it really was Daryl Morey, right? He was an assistant in the front office for the Celtics, and then he got hired to be the Houston general manager, and he more than, I will give Steph Curry credit, but as a general manager, he was the first to really buy in, and then the Celtics too, when he was with the Celtics, and then when he went to the Rockets, like he just went all in. And you know, he is a smart guy. If you read The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis, it talks a little bit about his history in the first chapter. It's a great book, by the way. I'm a huge Michael Lewis fan. And so the Rockets, you know, they just, if you look at Kirk Goldsberry, he likes to do those shot charts, like they were the first team to really just do layups and 3-pointers. That's all we're going to do, right?
Yeah.
Because if you look at the data, the expected points on a layup is going to be, 1 point, depending on the player and if they're contested or not, right? But like it's going to be over 1 point, right? You make well over 50% of layups and they're worth 2 points. So on average, it's worth over a point. And then for 3-pointers, right? Most teams now shoot really well, but there used to be guys like Steph Curry, like shoots 40+% from 3. Well, that's 1.2 points on average because it's worth 3 points.
Right.
So that's like a layup, right? Over the course of the game, it's like shooting an open 3-pointer is more valuable than a layup. And so I think it was part of that was the Rockets and the Celtics really started going into more of that strategy and started getting rid of the mid-range 2-pointer. And other teams saw them having success with James Harden, for example, who's a great player, but he wasn't even a starter for the Oklahoma City, who shot Russell Westbrook is still holding out his mid-range 2, and he's a great player too, but he shoots a lot of long 2s. Kevin Durant didn't used to shoot as many 3s, right? And so I think a lot of that was the Rockets, and then Steph Curry came along, and the Warriors are very dominant even before they got Kevin Durant, and him and Klay Thompson just were exceptional 3-point shooters, and they also with Draymond Green down low were able to do the layups and 3-pointers. And so
Splash Bros.
I think what happened was a lot of times in sports, and I think in real life too, we don't believe something until we've seen it with our own eyes.
Yeah.
And so we have, like I said, we have all these biases, and we're like, well, we've done it this way for so long. Why would we change? Why would a coach who played in the NBA, and most coaches used to play in the NBA, maybe they were an all-star, who is some guy that just looks at data to tell him that we need to change our strategy, right? Like, and you can imagine, like, if I was a former professional athlete and I had some, little recent college grad tell me, I think
glasses and tweet vest,
I'd be like, what? But that's why having an open mind and being willing to learn is so, and not having too strong of biases is so important, because when the data presents itself, you have to be willing to trust the data.
Yeah.
Right. I don't like the phrase trust the science. You talked about that on your last podcast. I love the phrase trust data. And sometimes data is collected in a flawed way. So you have to be skeptical of the data. It's always good to be skeptical, but you have to be willing to be convinced. Like, if you can be convinced, if you're not willing to be convinced of a different opinion, then I don't really value your opinion, because it's not one grounded in truth, right? If you're willing to be convinced of something else, even if you already believe something, then that's fine, as long as you're willing to be open to it. So I think in sports and really in life, we have to be open to that. So the NBA solely adapted because they saw teams be successful. And in the NFL, and then they also got player tracking data about in 2011 or 12, 13, and that also changed the game. People were able to do really much more in-depth analysis to evaluate trends and things like that. And the NFL, they were about 5 years behind with the player tracking. They've had that now for four years or so. But really in the NFL, there were teams, the Browns, they had Sashi Brown, who was the acting sort of general manager, and he really bought into this. And, in the NBA, we had the 76ers, the Sam Hinkie, kind of go through like the tank process, and because they really understood the value of high draft picks.
Yeah.
And, you get good players for cheap, and then you can spend money on other players, and getting more draft picks, and understanding, this is a finding that we found in the NFL, and it really holds true across all sports, is that the top of the draft holds a lot more value, but really no one's that good at predicting draft picks. And so the more you think about it of winning the lottery, the more lottery tickets you have, the higher chance you have of winning the lottery. And you're really not that much better at picking a winning number than anyone else. You just need more potential numbers. Right. And so we saw that work in the NBA, with the 76ers, that they went kind of with the tank process, and it really did work out. I mean, Sam Hinkie, the GM at the time, that he got fired. But I mean, the 76ers now have been good for several years. Yep. They missed on several draft picks. They certainly did, but they hit on others, and that's why they just needed more draft picks. And the Browns did that. And Sashi Brown, same thing, lost his job because the coach was like frustrated that they, were doing this. And they initially stuck with the coach, and Sashi Brown lost his job. But now look at it, the coach is gone and Sashi Brown is gone. But the players they got are the ones now helping them. And sometimes it's not even the players you select. It's just getting enough good players that for cheap, and then seeing a free agent sees that, and we're like, we have the money to pay you, and look at all of our good young talent.
Yeah.
So then you have the resources, because you draft picks are a lot cheaper to spend money on than free agents. So then now you have free agent money that you can go dangle at Odell Beckham. You know, it's like, well, we'll trade for you, but we can re-sign you for a really good deal. And then you can build off of that. So the NFL, and you asked this question, the NFL has changed drastically in the last 5 years. And to the casual observer, you might have noticed it a little bit, but fourth down attempts happen over twice as much as they used to just a few years ago. Now the next thing is to get them to go for 2 more. They're still hesitant to do that, but that has changed too. People going for 2 more, and you'll see, same thing. The Philadelphia Eagles, they had a huge analytics department. They won the Super Bowl because they went for it on 4th down more, and they beat the Patriots. And so, it used to be like you have to do things the Patriot way because the Patriots are the ones that won. And all of a sudden, the Philadelphia Eagles won with a backup quarterback who's never been good at any other moment in his NFL career. Nick Foles has never been that good. And yet, here he is coming in as a backup in the playoffs, and they won the whole thing because they were aggressive and they took risks, and they, understood that when you're the underdog, you have to be more aggressive, take more risks, and it cashed in for them and they won. And since then, more teams have done that. And now almost every single NFL team has at least one person that works on analytics. That the top teams, I would say, in this department would be still the Eagles. They're a little bit dysfunctional in the front office right now, but they have a great analytics department. The Ravens maybe are like masterclass in this. Their coaches, you'll hear John Harbaugh talk about in press conferences after the game, well, this is what my guys told me to do. And so I did it. I went for it. I should do it more, they tell me, but I'm trying to listen to them. Yeah. And the Browns still have a great group, and the Colts have a couple guys too that you'll even see them on like Sunday Night Football, radioing in like, hey, this is when you go for, don't go for it here. So it really has changed in football, and it's going to continue to. The rates of passing have increased. And people might think, well, that's just because I've seen it. But really, passing more is an analytics thing that we've learned is successful. And that's why it's been done. So I have a long story about football analytics. It actually goes back 40 years to Virgil Carter at BYU. Right. And then his connection to Bill Walsh in Cincinnati for the Bengals and how they came up with the West Coast offense. But Virgil Carter was a BYU statistics student 50 years ago, and he wrote a paper about expected points in the NFL on 1st and 10 and how many points on average you score in different places in the field. And like no one used it for like 35 years, but like all NFL analytics now uses that concept of like, what is your expected points based on your down distance and yard line. And most analysis is now, on whether or not you're successful or you're efficient is all done based on that concept.
BYU making waves in the analytics world since the 50s and 60s, I guess. Huh? Awesome. Well, Paul, thanks for coming on and spending some time talking to us about, sports analytics and the application of it. I think hopefully the discussion about Bayesian statistics, I found that really useful, and I think listeners will find that useful to understand a little bit about, we always hear about biases and data and whatnot, but I think you gave a really good explanation about how data and how the framework, whether you're a frequentist or Bayesian, how you view data and how you construct it and what it means for you as a statistician. So that was very well said. I appreciate you coming on and explaining that.
Yeah, let me just say, there's a great book about the history of Bayes' theorem. It's called The Theory That Would Not Die. And I would highly recommend it if people are interested. It kind of goes through the history of Bayes' theorem back to Sir or Reverend Bayes to Laplace, who really kind of took it as French mathematician, took it mainstream. Yep. And all the different uses it's been used in the last 100 years, from finding the Titanic to locating other missing, submarines or things like that, to Alan Turing and breaking the Enigma code, and lots of good use cases in history of Bayes' rule.
I was going to say, do you have any last words? But I think that's perfect. The theory that would not die. That's the book. We all need to read it and become smarter and become better at understanding data, understanding when we need to adjust our biases and when we need maybe a little bit more evidence. Paul, thanks again for coming on. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, we'll see you.